Hello, everyone. I am Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We come to you today with our audio version of our Mayshad Women in Money series. Thank you so much for being with us today. You know, even in the best of days on a warm, sunny July 1st day, we have a bit of internet issue, connectivity issue. So we're coming to you audio today. So please stay with us. This is going to be an incredible show. As you know, we are Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Please make sure to check out all of our programming at joinmayshad.com. We come to you live every Thursday with our Mayshad Women in Money series at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Monday, each week, we kick off with Dr. Risa Reiger, one of our investors and clinical psychologists, who helped set up our Week for Success, followed by our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion show at Tuesdays at 4. And Workshop Wednesdays. We have some really incredible workshops coming up for you as well. So please make sure to check us out at joinmayshad.com. Feel free to type in your questions and comments into the chat bar, and let's start. Today's theme is Growth, Scale, and Tales from the Future. And I'm honored to have Alice Globus with us today. Hi, Alice, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course. Alice is the partner, chief financial officer, and investment committee chair of Globus Growth. She has deep expertise in strategic business planning and investment strategy, venture capital and PE, and private equity and impact investing. She served as the president and chair of the board of WInkey&Dutch and was the former partner and CFO of StrataCore Management. Alice, I am so fascinated with your background and your educational, particularly your educational trajectory. You have a bachelor's in astronomy and astrophysics and had your Ph.D. candidacy in astrophysics as well. I'm so interested to learn more about your early interest in this space and tell us a bit about how that academic training guided your career trajectory.
That question is probably one of the most common questions I receive when people see that I did my PhD studies in astrophysics. They're like, how are you here? You know, one of the things that I got involved in physics and astronomy is that I was fortunate enough to have an internship at the Museum of Natural History here in New York City. And this was back in the early 2000s. And it was from a National Science Foundation grant. And it's for research undergraduates that want to pursue careers in science. And at the time, it was the first year they did it. It was being formed by Neil deGrasse Tyson. So that was kind of my foray into astronomy. And, you know, if anyone's ever heard him speak, or, you know, he just makes it so fun and loving and an amazing thing. And I just decided from there to, you know, I got to pursue a career in astrophysics, and I just kind of fell in love with the field. But what you think is happening versus what actually it is, it wasn't for me, mostly because the field is supported through National Science Foundation grants and various other grants. And I wanted to be more in control of my future versus depending on other people to supply grant money. So that was kind of my main deciding factor for not going into academia and astrophysics versus trying to find something else that was more fitting to my nature.
Yeah, it's so interesting, you know, the sentence that you said, be in control of your future. And I think we're now experiencing a tremendous moment in time where everything's disrupted and we're pivoting in ways that we never would have anticipated. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, I know that you're also in the midst of transition for yourself too. You're closing out your multiple family office. You also served as president and chair of the board of a family business. And in preparation for our call, we were talking about the joys and challenges of being in business with your family. I too come from a family where my parents were in business together and owned multiple clothing stores. And you know, there are joys and challenges and learning lessons that you take away from that. What did you learn for yourself about that, you know, through those experiences, both in the sense of navigating the family business waters, and then how did your relationship with that to yourself and to your family change over time because of that?
I think one of the biggest things is working with a family business, regardless of what it is having that delineation between business versus family, which is very hard to do. If you're at the dinner table and you've all been working together and just had a bad day, it can ooze over into that setting. So it's really important to kind of compartmentalize as best as you can. This is business and this is family time. And I think, those skills are applicable in any job setting. This is work, but now I'm here with my family at dinner time. We shouldn't be checking our text messages or mail or email or whatever it might be, that's happening during those moments of family time.
And I'm wondering, during this period of time, we're all kind of under one roof with family, with life, with work, with, just trying to figure out what comes next. And I'm sure that there's a bit of morphing for people that's happening in this moment in time as well. And yet, going back to what you were saying earlier about wanting to be in control of your future, what does that look like for you now in the sense of what comes next for you?
Well, no one has a crystal ball for where things are going to go. Part of what I'm looking for in the future, and I think most people feel this with their own careers, is that they want to work with the right team and the right group of people. And you really don't want to be in a transient situation. So right now with COVID, everyone feels that they're really in this truly state of transit, whether it's, do I go visit my family? Me living in New York City, we had educational questions of whether we should be sending our child to an overpriced preschool in the fall if it's just going to be to Zoom meetings. It's not effective. So these are questions that everyone's life is in flux. So at this point, what I've been working with is with my colleagues and people I've worked with for a long time, and just finding the right team of people that I want to be spending, the other family, that you're spending 40, 50 hours a week plus every week with on a daily basis.
It's interesting at Mayshad, we talk a lot about, using this period of time to really think through what do you want from, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Like, what do you really truly want from your career? What do you want in your relationships? What do you want from your life? And also using this time to, think through, really what value are some of the relationships that you've held on to in the past bringing you now? Are they bringing you joy? Are they bringing you, one step further to how you want to accomplish your goals? And, for companies as well, they're also using this moment in time of thinking through how to engage with people in a more meaningful and a deeper way to make sure that they're building the best teams possible. Talk to us a bit about, what you see in this space. And, from an investor's perspective, for example, are investors going to be looking at, teams differently as they think through what are the best companies to possibly invest in?
Well, I think that you're seeing twofold transformations right now truly happening. You have what's happening with COVID, and it's completely changed a lot of people's lives, especially those in major metropolitan areas. And then you have culturally what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's two really large and important issues that are affecting a lot of people's lives, and especially in the investment community, which has been very staunchly white male-dominated fields, especially in the tech industry. I was just watching the news this morning, and it was saying that 6% of Microsoft is minorities, women. So it's like they're trying to address these deep-rooted issues, and that's having an impact on investing in general. And in the finance field, it's one of those fields that once women have children, it historically tapers off because it's very hard for them to get back into the field due to licensing issues.
In our conversation prior to our show today, you and I had talked about, the underrepresentation of women in so many different sectors, even in 2019, 2020, and particularly in financial services and technology, and how that's further complicated then as we think through identity and the complexity and intersectionality of how we identify for ourselves. And, for women of color, I think you had mentioned that, such a tiny, tiny portion of women of color actually in financial services. what could be done to shift that? We talk about the efforts that companies make from a recruiting and training and retention perspective. But yet we know that within the corporate sense, so much of the work that's done in the DEI space is actually broken.
Yeah.
Right?
So
like, yeah.
One of the things that, I'm involved both with my family's foundation and with a nonprofit called the Financial Women's Association. And one of the things that we've noticed both through impact investing and through this organization is that really working with young women, like high school level, 13, 14-year-old girls, and beginning to get them financially educated. It's a shame that education, not just for women, but for everyone, financial education has gone on the wayside. So it's starting young and teaching them how to handle money, and then, that causes a whole chain of effects. So, well, if I've saved money, then I can start maybe that online Shopify shop, or I can start this new business that I've always wanted to do, or I have this idea to start a tech company. Like, you need to give them the resources at a fairly young age to have those opportunities.
It's interesting as well. I think there's a lot of generational differences between how, the demographic you're referring to, which are what I guess we call them Gen Zs now, Gen Zs and millennials, who are, approaching the age of 40, to Xers and boomers. We have 4 to 5 different generations in the workplace at any point in time now. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as well, when we think through the incredible massive layoffs and furloughs that are happening across every industry, but particularly in spaces like financial services and technology, where, women are overrepresented in unemployment claims, particularly for Gen Xers and baby boomers. What we saw in 2007, 2008 is that many women over a certain age, right over the age of 40, were furloughed and laid off. And right now, that number is even more tremendous, of course, because it's a very different moment in time. What is your advice for women who are, maybe in the Gen X baby boomer categories and feel maybe that they've aged out, right? Like that mindset of, well, now what do I do next, right? Like where can I turn? How can I reinvent? How can I pivot in a moment in time where, clearly I'm, in an age protected category?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. And, I think one of the big things is really assessing what skills you have and where that market is and where it's going. One of the things that as we're falling to maybe not having offices or having the split life between home and office, I think that does give a lot of opportunities that might not have been presented previously before. That could lead to, I think we discussed this previously when we first were talking, was educational technology is really going to make great strides for what we're going to start seeing over the next year or so, because right now educating via Zoom or Google Classrooms or Facebook or however they're doing, their classes, it's not sufficient, especially, for the whole age range, whether it's, elementary school students to high school. You have to have a really dedicated, good student to be willing to sit there at high school level and teach themselves in this setting where they're only having access to their teacher 1 or 2 hours a day. And as for an elementary school student, their parent has to be there. There's just no way that you're going to get a 7-year-old to sit in front of a screen. So I think we're going to see this pivot in technology that, that's going to happen. 6 months ago, Medicaid and Medicare didn't cover teleconferencing. Now it does. So you're seeing the shift, and shifts are happening extremely quickly because there's a necessity for it.
It's fascinating because, there were certain segments within technology that were, receiving a lot of critical acclaim and attention and funding, fintech being one. But now we're seeing EdTech, to your point around, what's the next evolution of the way in which people communicate and learn and share and grow. And EdTech was underfunded. And, do you think that there's a gender component to this as well? And I don't know, I would love your insights on this because, traditionally when we think about, particularly K through 12 education, there are more women than men, that work in K through 12 education until you get at the administrative levels. And wondering, if this opens up a spot also for women to think about different contributions that they can make because of their past history as educators themselves.
Both in education and healthcare are predominantly female-dominated industries, and who else is to have necessity is the mother of all innovation, as they say. And if you're not using this technology on a daily basis and you don't see a need for it, it's not going to push things forward. But when you all of a sudden have this necessity, here you are trying to teach your child, and then you start to see a niche. Well, if this is done differently, I think my child would be able to learn better. Or, if I had access to this type of healthcare virtually, it would make it a lot better for my family. So this is how innovation begins to happen.
It's interesting, continuing on the theme of innovation, you had multiple exits within your portfolio with some of the hottest companies, Facebook, Uber, Zoom, companies that were later acquired by Panasonic, Amazon, and many others. And in our conversation earlier this week, you talked about, and this is so interesting, that many of the biggest unicorns sprung up out of the Great Recession after the global economic collapse of 2007, 2008. Talk to us a bit about what may be similar this time around and what will be different.
I think one of the things was in 2008, 2009, when there was a recession with the housing, a lot of people were losing their mortgages, their car payments, and they lost access to things that they had. They were over leveraged and just couldn't afford to make all these payments on a lot of things that were affecting their everyday life. And I think that really led for the opportunity for companies such as Uber to have that more car sharing. You don't need a car in a major metropolitan area. You can have access to these, ride shares, that sort of thing. So I think with here, you're going to start to see other opportunities. And like I said before, I really think EdTech and HealthTech are what you're going to see the largest surge in. And I also think esports as well. People are craving that contact with others. And with, the NBA just started back up, but they're in full quarantine in Orlando. Like, this isn't a sustainable future for an organization. And, the MLB is just starting back up. And these are things that fans can't attend. And here we have a virtual sports arena that's supposed to be more popular than soccer by the year 2025. So it gives life to things that people would have considered silly or a joke, 5 to 10 years ago.
I think this is so fascinating. Just the concept of esports as a whole, and you were an early investor in this space. Talk to us a bit more about how that's evolved over time from the time that it first came onto your radar to where it is now, and where you see more innovation in that space happening.
Yeah. One of the things when I talk to other investors is, especially family offices, depending on the size of the family office, they might have a whole team of professional investors versus just having, maybe the family does the due diligence themselves and invest. And one of the things is, if you don't understand the technology at all, you probably shouldn't be investing in it. And esports, I think, was kind of, 5 to 10 years ago, fell into that category of people. A lot of people didn't understand why people would sit and watch other people play video games. It's kind of a bizarre concept. And even though it's extremely popular now and making billions of dollars, there's still a lot of people that are like, why would I be doing this? And it's, during COVID, Nintendo released Animal Crossing, and it sold 11 million copies in the first month, at $60 a pop. And, the average person playing that is not a child. These are not children playing. It's, people that are in their 20s and 30s, and they're seeing it as a way to really connect with others as a platform. And I think, one of the things about esports is it's really forming that online community that is rewarding to people, even though they can't be physically there. Also with esports, contrary to football in high school, a lot of times you don't see the other player at the end of the other end. So if someone has a disability, or if they're a different race, or, a lot of that goes away. So it gives people confidence that they might not necessarily have had before.
So interesting. I love what you said around creating the sense of community as well. And I think that this is, it's such a different moment in time where we all are thinking through, ways in which we can be social, maintain a level of distance and safety, but then also feeling like we're engaged around common interests. And I think in the first, at least for a lot of us in the first 3.5 months of remote work, we were really just focused on, kind of using our survival instincts to figure out exactly, just how to move forward and how to be brave during this period of time. And now we're all looking, particularly during the summer months, for, more engagement. And I'm wondering, will you see, whether it's through, AR or AI, more opportunity in this space for people to create really authentic, deep, heartfelt connections with each other, even though we may not be physically in the same space, or if we are physically in the same space, knowing that we're not going to necessarily be able to be in the same proximity of each other as we were in the past.
Yeah, like with augmented reality, it's still the barrier to entry for the average person to have access is pretty high. I think even with Facebook, Oculus, the equipment itself is, I'm not quite sure, but it's really $700-$800. So that's a very high barrier to entry. I think what we'll end up seeing, the major tech companies are working on this out of, Amazon, Google, Facebook, the usual suspects. But I think what we'll see is, someone will develop a technology that has a low cost of entry. So the average person can buy a headset or whatever it might be to be able to have that first step at feeling like you're there with a person. And, I think about 10 years ago, they had a virtual thing called Second Life, and people were claiming that it was going to be like the future of conferences. And, Harvard had a virtual campus in this video game, and it never took off. And it did to a certain extent, but it didn't take off on a wide scale, and it kind of petered out. I think a large part is that the person didn't really feel like they were truly there.
So I remember Second Life. Do you think it was too early for its time? Would now be a different time for something like that, where we can all exist and create different identities and exchange and purchase and barter and have a different world, a different experience? And could COVID be the prompt for a desire to actually do something like that again?
I think it could definitely urge on. I know I personally wouldn't feel comfortable going to a conference until things get under control in the near future, especially being from New York City and seeing, just my assistant lost 4 members of her family alone. It's
wow.
It's entire families have been ravaged by this in New York City and other major metropolitan areas. And I know personally I wouldn't feel comfortable injecting myself in that type of situation. So I think that there will be, a pivot towards in-person conferences with over time. But technology like this does take time. But quite often what you see is you'll see a tech company that develops something very truly amazing, and it will be purchased by a larger company that really just expands upon the technology.
Within the Mayshad ecosystem, we also talk about, how leaders and companies and people within companies will need to become more empathetic and more transparent and more vulnerable going forward as well, to really ensure that, that we're engaging at a human level, not knowing exactly, to your point, like what others have gone through during this period of time, right? And we're all still experiencing it very differently in the sense of, people continue to die based upon, what state you may or may not be located in. You may be at the height of the pandemic right now where other states have leveled off. And so we're all still kind of working in a very different moments of times together, but yet also separate from each other. And I'm wondering, what do you think about the shift in the sense of, many of these traits seem to be not necessarily masculine traits that would have been admired and celebrated in the business sense, not even, just a year ago. But yet now we're talking about, companies needing to tap into more of that emotional intelligence aspect of, the human mind. And what are your thoughts about that in the sense of, will there be a different style of leadership that's going to be championed above and beyond what normally would be, stereotypically defined as a more masculine model?
I would like to think so. I also think some of this might be generational as well, because I feel with the younger generations that these traits are really encouraged in both boys and girls, and that will translate to what's happening in the workplace environment. Even Vogue has Vogue Teen, one of their most popular segments is Vogue News for teens. And one of the most asked about topics are, these are questions that people are asking at a young age. So I think having that awareness at a younger age is very important. And I think children are taught at a younger age to be more empathetic. Now, there's people who have pluses and minuses if you ask, depending on who you ask on this. But it is important because, people are beginning to pivot towards that value of a family versus, I should be working, 100 hours a week, and my family, gets kind of put on the second side. So values are shifting.
Do you think also in the sense of how we think about networking, we're also going through a period of time where we see values shifting in the sense of why women, for example, want to network and, their hopes and aspirations of what they want to get from connecting with, other women, like-minded women. You had mentioned that you're on the board of Financial Women's Association, FWA. What has that experience taught you about the value of networking for yourself, number one? And number two, how do you think networking for women will change and evolve over the period of time because of what we're experiencing right now?
So I think until, COVID's under control, I think networking has changed drastically. People want to are replacing what they feel a necessity to have more Zoom calls or more these virtual conferences to try to replace that interaction. But where it's coming from in the past, me personally, the reason why I go to conferences is to meet people that I can either do business with or invest in companies or, whether it's a philanthropic purpose as well. So, I'm not necessarily going there to make friends, but I'm there to meet business contacts. But that was very different than when, 10, 15 years ago when I first started my career, I felt very on an island transitioning from astrophysics to finance, which is a very, both are male-dominated fields, but finance is particularly, skewed towards men. And I just felt lost, and I really wanted to have that mentorship and have that connection because I worked at a small investment bank of roughly 100 people, and there were only 3 women. I was the only banker, and the other 2 were in the back office, doing HR and what would be traditional female roles in finance. And that just wasn't sufficient for me. I wanted to meet other women that were successful in what they did and learn from their experiences.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting what, the feedback that we get from women in our ecosystem as well, in the sense of, no matter if you're coming from a male-dominated industry or you recently left one, but just, the different moments and different points in time that women wish they would have started their network earlier with their ecosystem, their tribe, their inner circle. And we find often that for a lot of different reasons. I think that there's a lot of pressure that women put upon themselves and each other to be the best version of yourself so you can mentor, right? Or knowing that you have so many other demands personally as it pertains to either child rearing or keeping, if you're part of the sandwich generation, feeling you also, have elder care responsibilities or, serving on X number of boards. And so women, we're very skilled at packing our schedule, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and double and triple committing. And often, don't really think about networking in the same way. And, women often will, say to us, well, I know I need to network when I'm looking for my next client or for my next job, or my next whatever that is. And I think men think of it as relationship building over time. And so it's interesting.
I think that's one of the largest mistakes anyone can make. And I honestly disagree with you on that statement, saying that men feel that it's a relationship that could be built over time, whereas women feel like it's kind of more of like right now, because my experience has been actually just the opposite. As an investor, I have people contacting me all the time. And, if there's something I like, but I'm like, well, it's too immature. It's not something that's right for us right now. I find more of the female founders are willing to keep in touch with me and give updates on a regular basis and be like, this is how we're doing, and like looking for that feedback. Whereas a lot of the male founders are like, oh, well, she's not willing to give me money right now. She's not worth my time at all.
That's fascinating.
So, which I think is a huge mistake, because quite often if I say I'm not ready for it right now, or I have interest in it, keep in touch, it's because probably, maybe 6 months or a year, when you've made progress or shown traction or the benchmarks, or you've met certain, KPIs that we're willing to start looking at you or to invest into.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting, and to hear about your experience in a very different way too. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because I think that's would be great for our audience to hear about as well, in the sense of, particularly from the entrepreneur investor relationship. And, I think that, many of us tackle it without really knowing if there's a right way or a wrong way to go about it, number one. And number two, understanding that, I think many female entrepreneurs, feel hesitant to dip their toe into those fundraising conversations, because, those conversations and those networks and those ecosystems have been, aren't as welcoming in some cases to women as they are to male founders, for a lot of different reasons. And we know that, and I don't know, Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's, close to 4% of all VCs across the country are women, right? And so we know that we're so thrilled to have you with us. I'm sorry?
I think that would actually be high. I think it's between 2 to 3%, but it's atrocious. Either way, it's terrible.
It's even more dismal. So that's why we love having this conversation with you. Thank you for doing what you do, number one. But then also, for many women, I think that they also feel like the idea of growth and scale for the sake of growth and are, right? And so how do you balance that as a funder when, obviously you want, X number of returns on your investment, but, for female entrepreneurs who may not be in the 10 times, 25 times return, how can they still find fundraising to be a valuable experience for them, in the sense of how they think about growth and scale for their companies?
One of the things that most people don't realize is that fundraising is not easy, regardless of whether you were raising the first seed round, Facebook back in the 2000s. Like, there were a lot of no's before there were yeses. And you really have to develop that thick skin. And a lot of women don't like asking for money. I'm guilty of that as well. And it's hard when you're in that position. But you have to make the ask. And one of the things, which has been interesting is women founders tend to choose lower profit margin businesses generally. And I don't know why that is, the psychological reasons. I don't know. It's just, it tends to be in industries like, for example, EdTech. The profit margins were particularly low, which is why, in the tech world, they weren't really sought after companies. But I think one of the big things is that if you have a business that's doing, that has found its niche market and is doing well to gain clients, or you have a new technology that's really changing some space of whatever that might be, then you really have, if you believe in what you're doing, you need to convince the investors that that's, you're in your vision. You have to have that buy-in, and having proof of traction is very important as well.
Do you think that any of what you just said, will that change because of the pandemic and because of the way in which just life and work and business, and it's all very different, right? Like going forward as well. And, you and I had talked a bit about, just, kind of the shaking up of supply chains and, what is that going to mean for the US from a global perspective? But then wondering, for entrepreneurs that are growing and scaling, will that relationship between the investor and the entrepreneur look different going forward, or, will the metrics and the measurements and the KPIs pretty much be the same?
I think it's going to be harder to get those relationships going forward, honestly, until people can start having face-to-face meetings, especially from family office perspectives, because we're pretty reclusive group. It's like one of the things that we have our network of people we co-invest with, and we really truly stay within that network. And then occasionally, we might go to a conference and we see some founder that really just resonates with us, and we want to take a chance on that. But for the most part, it's, staying within that group. And to a certain extent, VCs are the same way. A lot of the top VCs all co-invest in the best companies, in their series, their later series rounds. So it's really penetrating that, which is frustrating and intimidating, and has this systemic propensity to fund not women. So it's difficult, but it can be done, and having that tenacity and that persistence is really important.
Alice, let's go back to the theme of supply chains, in the sense of, what's one of the things obviously that the pandemic really brought to light is how much of how we consume and spend changed from, finding hand sanitizer and toilet paper to, companies reinventing their business model pretty quickly and adopting and, going from maybe high-end exclusive fashion design to, making masks or other PPP. Wondering, your thoughts about this in the sense of the short term, but in the longer term, and what does this mean for the U.S. just in the sense of the global nature by which we conducted business in the past? How does that impact, how we open again and continue to be open or continue to be closed?
So as consumers, everyone says, oh, everything's made in China. And you don't realize that everything truly is made in China, everything from your pharmaceutical drugs. And one of the major reasons why hand sanitizer shortages in the United States is because they couldn't get the plastic bottles because they're being produced in China. So that's causing massive supply chain issues, which is forcing U.S. companies to reevaluate their supply chains and having outlets within the United States that they can produce whatever their goods might be, whether it's coming from pharmaceutical supply chain to jewelry, clothing, anything that is manufactured. So it's really forcing that reevaluation of the supply chain. And, there were tariffs put in place to try to encourage, U.S. manufacturing, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And one of the major reasons is that the cost of labor is significantly higher here than in China or Bangladesh or India. And we have a conscious effort to preserve our environment. So the disposal of waste that's a manufacturing byproduct is very expensive. So a lot of people don't think about it when they're looking at that, piece of jewelry on the supply rack of Walmart, that's made in China. The reason why that thing is $2 and was probably made for maybe 20 cents or maybe even less than that, cost that is because there's different standards that we have here in the United States. So it forces people to evaluate their purchasing. And the reality is when there's an economic hardship, they're not going to purchase something that's made in the United States because it's made in the United States. So something has to be done to really close that gap of cost.
Let's shift a bit.
Answer your question.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I'm wondering about, how does this all get positioned within and through the lens of social impact investing in ESG, and companies now taking more accountability for how they think about doing good, right? And mixing, business with social purpose and profitability with social purpose, and understanding that we may be also now in a different period of time, both now and going forward, in the sense of, how do we validate, how do we assess responsibility, how do we measure impact, and will companies truly pay more than lip service to these things?
Well, at the end of the day, it's the buyers who hold them accountable, not so much the government. If people choose not to purchase products that are not upholding these standards, it will change the actions of whatever company it is, ranging, it doesn't matter if it's sneakers to pharmaceutical. Well, pharmaceuticals are a little different because you're forced to purchase that due to your issues. But, whether it's clothing or hair supplies, people look at that, like when I purchase sunscreen for my child, I want to make sure that it's reef friendly because I don't want to be killing the coral reefs. And I am willing to pay a little extra for that because it's important to me, for me to do that, I feel. So, but someone else might feel differently. So that's what comes at the end of the day, is having the social accountability is really where people are spending their dollars.
And do you think also, from an investment perspective, people will go beyond, wanting to, it's interesting in the past when, for those of us who, are interested in both, using our money through consumption purchases to, spend with companies that are doing, good things, or at least doing less harm than others, but also for those of us that invest in social impact funds. Will there be an evolution from how we think about, what kind of questions are people asking their financial advisors or asking their wealth managers, just in the sense of understanding, okay, just because I don't want my money to go in investments or investing in companies that, support alcohol, tobacco, firearms, but now there's so much more by which we measure good by, right? It's around, how many women sit on boards in a particular company, or, is there equality throughout a company in the sense of ensuring that there are women in senior level positions, or, different sustainability metrics. And do you think that we're in a really unique moment in time where those things, as we know that many ESG funds are outperforming others right now in this period of time, will that hold in the sense of, kind of us going through this renaissance period where we're going to come out of it on the better side, more responsible consumers, spenders, and investors?
I think that, just like I mentioned before, with this generational shift, with more children have been taught a different sense of empathy. I think that this is also along the same line. It's having this social consciousness that certain things are important to us as a society for us to have, not just us to have a good life, but our children and our grandchildren. And, you know, it was interesting. I had a client, they were from Saudi Arabia, but they lived in Dubai, and very wealthy family, and he was blessed with 14 daughters. And until that point of him having 14 daughters and no sons, he didn't see the benefit of having his children with, you know, like the thought of him doing Western style education wasn't important to him. But until he had those children himself, it changed his view on the world. And now his daughters are running his multi-billion-dollar industries, and like they were educated in some of the best schools in Europe and the United States. So it changes your perspective when something you believed was the way the status quo is, when all of a sudden your own children don't have those opportunities. So I think that, you know, the younger generation, you know, the way my son's only 3 now, but the way I hope to be raising him is that he fights just as hard for what he believes in is right, and regardless of whether it directly affects him.
Thank you, Alice. That's such a really amazing example of just, you know, the impact of the personal experience on, you know, some of the decisions we make. And we had a couple of years ago, I co-produced a conference, and Chad Myers, the chief meteorologist from CNN, was one of our keynote speakers. And he talks very openly about how he was a climate change denier for many years. And there was a moment in time at which CO levels got to a certain level. And then he was like, wow, like something's really shifted here. And I feel like we're almost at the point of no return. And for him, it was understanding, you know, from a data science perspective, like exactly what that number was, but then also thinking about like the real very true, not even possibility, but the certainty that the world that his son will grow up in is going to look very different than the world that we enjoy today, right? And this is, of course, before COVID, but I think it's really through, you know, our own personal experiences and, you know, developing more of a sense of, you know, community-based responsibility that will, all of the things that we're talking about now during this period of time that we hope will change, we'll actually see change really come to fruition because of what we want for our future, right? No matter if we have kids or not, right? But really the world that we want to leave behind. That actually blends really nicely. Alice, we're going to jump into a couple of questions in the few minutes that we have left remaining from our audience. One viewer listener wants to know if there are more empathetic technologies that are being developed because of this moment in time versus some of the other platforms out there that are clearly about or have been called out for their reputation of exploiting data and even behaviors that may have had a negative effect on humanity. Will technology become more empathetic and more, maybe not humanizing isn't the right word, but, you know, developed and launched and managed and measured and kept in check to ensure that, you know, the end purpose actually well serves the end user as opposed to it being the end user being exploited for data?
You know, I think the reality is that companies need to make money. So, and right now data is very powerful. You know, you could sell it in a lot of different ways. You know, it's everything ranging from Facebook to 23andMe is being used by most major pharmaceutical companies to find new cures. And some people have a problem with that. You know, I don't want, you know, I have someone in my own family who's like, I don't want to be tested because I don't want pharmaceutical companies using that data for drug discovery. But I feel exactly the opposite. I feel like it's a civic duty to give back in that way if I can. So I think really when at the end of the day, you know, who you vote for when it comes to the Congress and Senate, like that's where it's really going to make a difference, because if these companies are not held accountable with how your data is used, then it's not going to be respected. And there's a need for monetization of you know, technological platforms, and data is the easiest way to monetize.
And do you feel, Alice, also that, you know, during this period of time that, you know, we know that data breaches are at an all-time high. I know particularly as it pertains to all of the ways in which we're transacting our life digitally and in the, and in the flat world versus in the real world. So everything from, major banks that probably won't even reopen many of their customer service departments or their locations, their branches where they directly service the end user. Like, what are the various ways in which both the financial services industry and maybe the healthcare industry, obviously as well, will need to become more responsive to ensure that they're actually protecting their clients as we're, in a period of kind of just trying to figure out how to do business?
Well, I think one of the big things, both for HIPAA compliance and all the, the federal compliance for financial institutions, they're pretty strict, especially with finance. Like, I'd say that they're behind trying to meet, what's happening with technology, because legislation moves significantly slower than technology does with our system. So I think, one of the big things with banks is they don't use Zoom for their conferences, their interdepartmental calls, because of security reasons. So, this is forcing banks to have these types of technology available, but is also meeting the compliant, standards. And same with, healthcare, with sharing your records, like, these are things that are very important, keeping that personal data safe. And I'd say that those two industries are probably one of the best protected. Probably out of all your data, that is probably the best protected data that you come into contact with. Over, Facebook records pretty much everything you say if you have Instagram, because you have to consent to them accessing your microphone all the time, which is how they do their ads. So, like, these are things that you have to judge is, what's important to you. But your financial data with banks and healthcare, is probably one of the safer platforms, just due to all the legislation that has gone into place in the infrastructure to keep that secret and keep that safe. And there's major monetary penalties too for these companies if that tends to be breached.
Alice, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation, and I would love to have you back when our internet's working and your internet's working. We can actually maybe someday even face-to-face in person.
That would be lovely.
Here's one final question that I love to ask our guests. What advice would you give to your 16-year-old self?
Oh, geez. That's a hard one. I did not take a gap year between going to high school and college, and I wish I had. It seems so silly, but it really would have allowed me to develop more as a person. I think one of the things was just taking that time when you're young to have that break to really assess what's important. It's crazy that we with how expensive colleges are now, $60,000-$70,000 a year if you don't get any aid, to really assess what you want to do in your future. I was in the point with 2008 where a lot of my friends went back to graduate school because they just didn't have jobs, and now they're straddled with $200,000 worth of debt. $100,000, $200,000. That's affected their whole life for their future with a degree that they may or may not have needed. So I think really assessing at that time what's important to you, and if you don't know, then try to figure that out before you spend money, whether it's to buy a house or spend that money on an MBA or a degree that may or may a master's. Like, how valuable is that to your career? Maybe 5-10 years ago, I was assessing whether I should get an MBA, and I was like, is $200,000 worth it for me for that purpose? So, that could have changed my whole financial future if I had decided to do that.
It's such incredible advice, because I think that this is also a time where many of us feel, do I need more education, right? Like if I'm going to reinvent and pivot and try to stay fresh and relevant and current, particularly for professional women, like, what is the right mix between, maybe looking for a different opportunity from a job perspective versus going back and getting that second or third master's or first master's or whatever it is, and really thinking through, like, how are you really truly investing in yourself? And I think there's a short-term mindset that we often employ where we think about, yes, that absolutely makes sense, versus really thinking through, okay, exactly to your point, Alice, like how are you going to pay off $200,000, right? And is there enough of an ROI on that in the long term to really have that make sense? Right. And really think through the long-term ramifications and implications of your short-term decisions. It's such great advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alice, so much for being with us today. Please, for all of our listeners out there today, we promise to be back with our video streaming next week. Please make sure to join us at joinmayshad.com to learn about all of our upcoming content and program and membership opportunities for you too, to stay engaged and involved with us every single week. We do offer many opportunities to be involved as a member, with deep dive conversations, with opportunities to help us create change in the new world going forward. My name is Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Have a great 4th of July weekend, everyone. See you next week.